I'm Janet Morana, Executive Director of Priests for Life. And I know on this program we talk a lot about abortion, but guess what? There's another topic that is life is under attack. It's called euthanasia. And guess what? In West Virginia, euthanasia is on the ballot. And joining me today is an expert on this topic, my dear friend Alex Schadenberg, and he's the executive director of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. Alex, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Janet. I'm happy to be with you and to talk about this topic and to inform people of what's happening. So yeah, this is very important.
Well, I have to tell my audience here that you have been battling this issue for about 25 years, both in Canada and in the United States. And, I think, Alex, when people think of euthanasia, somehow they think it's like old people. But what I try to tell people, people are euthanized, believe it or not, any age, right? Could you just
Yeah.
give us a snapshot about that? It's not just an old people's thing, right?
Well, how the laws are defined, it's not really about old people per se. Now, in the U.S., where you have assisted suicide laws now in 10 states, most of those laws require you to have a terminal condition, but that doesn't mean you're elderly or something like that. And even then, it's sort of questionable. Where in Canada, where we have euthanasia, you don't have to even be terminally ill. All you need is to have an irremediable medical condition, which means you'd have a chronic condition, someone with a disability, etc. And so we see, like I was just looking at the stats from last month for the killing that was done in my own province of Ontario, Canada, and I'm a Canadian, don't hold that against me. And the youngest person who died that month was 24 years old.
Unbelievable. So just to give us a snapshot of the United States, because I don't know, somehow people don't think this is a hot topic here. And like, oh, really? Do we have to be worried about that? How many states already are allowing people to have death by, euthanasia?
So you have assisted suicide. I'm going to have to make a clear distinction, even though it does confuse a bit. You have it legal now in 10 states in the U.S. So Oregon was the first state that legalized assisted suicide, and it did through a voter initiative. And so that came into place in 1998. And then the second state was Washington State, and that was in 2009 when that law came into place. So you can see that for many, many years, you had one state that had legalized and everyone else had rejected it. Now, last year alone, or this year alone, there's been 20 initiatives to legalize assisted suicide. There's been 20 bills, and they've all failed. So in fact, it's the same thing. There has not been a new state that has legalized assisted suicide now in almost 3 years. But you have 10 states. What's important about this is the whole deception around this, because people sell assisted suicide as being, about my choice and my freedom and everything. And when you read what these bills, what these laws actually do, is they actually give the doctor or a nurse, depending on which states. Some states only allow a doctor, some states allow nurse practitioners also to be involved, to actually cause your death. So they approve it, they cause your death. They're directly involved with killing you. So this is, some people say, oh, well, this is about my freedom, Alex. And I say, is it your freedom when somebody else is directly involved with killing you? That definition doesn't hold anymore. When we're considering, though, all these states, what they do is they try and say it's only for those few cases. That's how they legalize it. They argue it's only for the few cases. But in nearly every state in the U.S. that's legalized assisted suicide, what they've done is they've come back a few years later and expanded their laws. So whether it be Oregon, Washington State, Colorado, Vermont, you name them, they've all expanded their laws. So they come in saying it's only for those few people, and we'll have these restrictions. They call them safeguards, but of course the language of them makes them wide enough that you can drive a hearse through them. But nonetheless, the point of it is that they say it's only for the few, but then that is the way to sell it. And after that, they expand it, and that's how they've done it in every state where they've legalized it.
What's the terminology and the difference, just for people to really get their minds to understand? There's a difference between assisted suicide means a doctor, nurse, or whatever the law says is causing the death of the patient. But what is it called when someone takes the stuff themselves, the euthanasia
Right.
drugs? What's
Okay.
the difference there?
So the difference is in, for instance, Canada, the Netherlands, Belgium, that's where they have euthanasia. And what happens is the doctor actually does it to them. So it's done by lethal injection. the doctor kills them. So it's a homicide. So, for instance, in Canada, where euthanasia is legal, they legalize euthanasia by creating an exception to homicide, whereas assisted suicide is the doctor prescribing the same lethal poison, because it is a poison, that's how they kill you. They prescribe the same lethal poison. The difference is you have to take it yourself. So you see, it's a type of assisting of a suicide. So in the US, the laws allow for assisted suicide, whereas in Canada it allows for euthanasia. The difference is not the intention. The intention is to cause death. The difference is not the outcome. The outcome is death. The difference is how it's done. Euthanasia is done by the doctor or the nurse, whereas assisted suicide is technically done by the person with the assistance of the doctor or nurse. You see, so there's a little bit of difference. Now, here's the problem, though. You can't actually differentiate them because none of these laws actually provide oversight at the time of death. Now, what do I mean by that? None of the assisted suicide laws in the US require a doctor or a third party, like an independent person or someone representing the government per se, to be there to make sure that the law was followed. None of those do. So therefore, if someone receives the lethal dose and they take it themselves, that would be assisted suicide. But if you did it to them, that would be euthanasia. And it's the same drugs. But none of these laws have any oversight. So therefore, you can't differentiate. How would you know it was a euthanasia or an assisted suicide? You don't know, because obviously speaking, there is no way to know unless the law actually has oversight. And there is no oversight.
Yeah, so basically, technically, if you didn't want to do it to yourself, but you want it done, you could just call a friend over and say, "Here, you
Yep.
you do it to me, but I won't be alive to tell everybody we cheated." Is what you're
No, you,
saying,
you
basically.
wouldn't know unless they self-reported it. Unless you say to the authorities, ha ha ha, it wasn't an assisted suicide. I actually killed him. You know, what's the difference between me killing you with a lethal overdose and you being prescribed a lethal overdose and me killing you? That wouldn't be a difference, but you wouldn't know the difference in the sense of the person was prescribed and it was considered legal. See, so you wouldn't know. There's no oversight. There was a case a few years ago in Washington State where a lawyer got involved because a family member said that the death of their father was very, very, very suspicious. So this lawyer was hired, contacted the police, got involved. But in the end, because these cases are considered privacy, the government of Washington State refused to release any information. So therefore, it was very difficult. So what happened in that case is the one son had said, I was visiting my dad just the day before, and he was saying that he wasn't sure whether he was going to take the lethal drugs. He was feeling pretty good, right? He was not planning to take it anytime soon. And the next day, the other son, so this guy's brother, came to visit, and his dad died that night. And so he said, according to the story, his dad had a lot to drink that day, and the other son basically encouraged him. The question was it actually voluntary? And there was no way to know. There was no witness at the time of death. The one son was asking for an autopsy. Usually they don't do autopsies with assisted suicide because the cause of death is known. He was asking for information, couldn't get it. It became a whole crazy situation. Yet the reality was, the son said, "Well, I was just visiting Dad yesterday, and he was saying I'm feeling good. If I take these drugs, it's not going to be for a while. I'm doing well right now. I'm happy." So you get to this situation. Was it voluntary? I don't know. You don't know. We don't know, and there was no oversight of the law.
Well, as you know, Alex, here in the states, we're in a big election season. We have
Yep.
about 10 states that are trying to put abortion through a ballot initiative in their state constitutions to make abortion legal through all 9 months of pregnancy, which is horrific. But I was shocked when you told me West Virginia has a ballot initiative on assisted suicide. So can you bring us up to speed on that?
Well, it's actually a ballot initiative to do the opposite of what those, abortion ballot initiatives are trying to do. It's actually trying to put in the state constitution of West Virginia how would you say, a type of a safeguard that they cannot pass euthanasia or assisted suicide. Because if it's in the state constitution, and let's say a future legislature wants to pass it, they would have to then change the state constitution in order to pass such a thing. So this is called Amendment 1 in West Virginia. And basically what it's saying is that it's protecting the state from legalizing euthanasia or assisted suicide. It says no person, physician, or healthcare provider in the state of West Virginia shall participate in the practice of medically assisted suicide, euthanasia, or mercy killing of a person, and nothing in this section prohibits the administration of a prescription of medication for the purpose of alleviating pain or discomfort while the patient's condition follows its natural course. So what it's saying is the state constitution will prohibit euthanasia, assisted suicide, mercy killing. Of course, if someone's in a lot of pain, that does not affect the question of providing pain and symptom management for someone who's in a lot of pain in order to allow them to have a natural death. So this is what's going on. And the difficulty with this is there's probably a lot of people who don't really know what this means. So they'll be looking at Amendment 1 and they'll be saying, but what does that mean? In West Virginia, assisted suicide is currently prohibited already. Euthanasia is currently prohibited. It's illegal. It's a homicide in West Virginia. In case of assisted suicide, they have a clear law prohibiting assisted suicide. What this is to say that is, in the future, we will not allow this in West Virginia. I think it's a good idea right off the bat because it's a clear protection for people against assisted suicide and euthanasia, but also it's protecting people because when does this actually happen? So let me give you an example. Pat McGeehan, who's the member of the West Virginia legislature who actually promoted this and got this passed, he actually knew somebody who went to Oregon and died by assisted suicide. And it was that experience which got him to promote and to make this a reality. And the reason was this person who he knew, they ended up moving to Oregon. So now, I don't know if I want to get into this too much, but Oregon has removed its residency requirements. So therefore, people who don't live in Oregon can die by assisted suicide now. And this guy had done so. But this guy was not actually dying. He was actually doing fairly well. He had a terminal condition, but he wasn't nearing death, etc. He was doing quite well. And on top of it, it was more of an issue of socially, he was alone. He had nobody in his life who was supporting him. It's not like he had a loving wife and he had kids who were saying, "Oh, please, Dad, don't do this." He was in a lonely state. He was emotionally conflicted. He was going through a difficult time of his life, and he then was seeking assisted suicide as a way out. And Pat saw that clearly, and he talks about the story saying, we need to protect people in their vulnerable time of their life. The other thing we have to know when we look at these type of ballot initiatives is we have to be careful with the other side, because the other side always comes in, the death people. They come in and they tell these extreme stories. So I want you to know right off the bat, this amendment, if it passes, will never prevent proper care of people as they're approaching death. There are times when people are experiencing pain. Now that's actually, believe it or not, you probably do believe it because you've been dealing with helping family members for years, and so you have a lot of experience with people as they're coming to their death. So and I know you well enough to know that we understand that not everyone, in fact most people, don't die in pain. But if you are in pain, there's nothing wrong with having alleviation of your pain and symptoms. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing, and that should be provided. And there's nothing in this bill to prevent that, and in this amendment to prevent that. So it does allow for good care, and there shouldn't be any confusion about that. You know what I mean? And this will not create confusion.
So just so people know, is Amendment 1, right, in West Virginia, and the pro-life vote is to say yes to Amendment 1, right? That's the pro-life vote.
This is to say yes. In West Virginia, vote yes to Amendment 1, yes.
Okay, yep. I just want to reiterate that because with all the abortion ones, it's vote no. So this is
the opposite. And this one's the opposite. It's vote yes. Yes.
Opposite. Vote yes is the pro-life vote. And I think this is good because they can't then target West Virginia in the future to try to pass all these kind of things because, assisted suicide, it's really putting something before people when they're in a vulnerable state. When people have an illness, no matter what their age. I just had someone at the doctor just the other day, and it was a kidney specialist. And he was explaining, well, you're at stage 4 kidney disease, but we're going to try and do this, this, and this to keep you there. And of course, this person said,
Yeah.
Well, what happens if it goes worse? He goes, well, when you get to stage 5, then you have to have dialysis. And then this person said, well, I'd rather die than have dialysis. And I was in the examining room with the person. I said, listen, you mean you don't want to watch your grandchildren grow up? Well, so you won't put up with going 3 times a week if someone takes you for dialysis, and then you're still going to live to watch all these happy moments. And then they just sat there very quiet and went, I don't know. But see, my point is,
Yes.
when people first get the news of a diagnosis, sometimes they say things that if you walk them through it, they really don't mean it. You know what I mean? Oh,
That's
I don't want to
exactly
live like
correct.
that. That famous saying, I don't want to live like that. The other danger they do is they sign all these directives. I don't want to be on life support. I don't want to be on this, that, and the other thing. And I always tell them, don't do any of that because you can't predict the future.
That's correct.
Sometimes you're on life support for. I have a friend with COVID. She lives in Tennessee. She's doing a lot better now, but she was on a ventilator for about 9 months fighting COVID when it first, it struck. Now she can walk with a walker, and eventually she'll be able to walk 100% fine because she's rehabbing and rehabbing.
Yeah.
But what if she had signed papers to saying no machines, no, I don't want to be resuscitated, no, don't do this, don't do that. You don't know.
No,
One
you
time
don't
I
know.
had another family member, and she was a teenager, critical car accident. They had to put her on a vent to treat her and diagnose her. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? They had to just put her under. And she was on the vent for about a week. And then they brought her up out of it. So I always say to people, never, ever, ever sign any of that stuff because you can't predict the future, right, Alex?
Yes. Now I'm going to say two things when to respond to this. First thing is that a recent study just came out, which more than confirms what you're saying, because this study looked at people who are in a persistent vegetative state, and people would say, "Well, what do you mean? These people are just laying in a bed? They're like the living dead." No, no, no. That study has actually proven that 25% of them are actually responding. So they're fully aware, they're inside, but they're in a more of a locked-in state. And so you can actually communicate them with them with the new technology we have today. And some of them are now, because you're able to communicate with these people, they're finding ways to get them out of their locked in state. So that's the first thing I'm saying. Not to say that being in a persistent vegetative state isn't concerning. Obviously it is. But I'm going to say this bigger thing. I don't want to confuse the issue of withdrawing or withholding or refusing medical treatment with the actual issue of assisted suicide or euthanasia, because if you refuse medical treatment, there might be a good reason for it. Might not be, but there might be a good reason for it. But in the case of euthanasia or assisted suicide, the intention is to cause death, and the outcome is your death. The purpose is your death, right? It's not to say I've had enough of treatment. So there are differences. Now, just so you know, Euthanasia Prevention Coalition does sell a power of attorney document, and we make it very clear, don't sign a DNR. Don't do any of these things, because you could always do it later if you're actually nearing death and it now becomes the time to do it. But if you say yes earlier to signing a DNR order, or saying you don't want to have ventilation, or you don't want this, or you don't want that, you can't change your mind later. You've signed that document. The document now is going to be looked at, and then we'll say, oh, they said they wanted no ventilator, they want to know this, they want to know that. Guess what? You get nothing then, because you said you didn't want it. And yet you might be in exactly the same situation as you were talking about, Janet, where the person is needing that time to get better. You can't change it now that you've said it, okay? And this is the problem with these situations. You don't want to invoke something. Now, that all depends on whether or not you're competent, obviously, because if you're still competent, you can make decisions for yourself. Getting down to assisted suicide, remember, it's not about a suicide per se. It is about a doctor or a nurse agreeing that your life is not worth living, and then they make the determination to have those lethal poison drugs prescribed to you. It's a horrific thing. They're horrific drugs to take. I'm not going to get into the whole thing right now. We can do another show on how the death actually occurs. It's not a pretty thing. As people say, oh, this is a death with dignity. No, it's not a death with dignity. Nonetheless, this is what it's about. It's about actually killing people. I'm opposed to killing people. Final thing is, I'm confirming everything you're saying about people going through a difficult time in their life, because we have a helpline. And we get calls all the time from people who are considering euthanasia or family members who are trying to talk somebody out of considering euthanasia, and because it's legal in Canada. So we're getting calls all the time about this. And I've talked to quite a few people who have been approved for being killed. They've been approved. And you're talking to them. And it always comes down to, I'm not saying they had no medical conditions, they had no concerns. They all have concerns. We all do in our lives at different times. But it always came down to the reality that either there's nobody in their life, they're very lonely, they've seen no, or they're very depressed, they lack feelings of meaning or purpose or value. They're going through a difficult time in their life. So it's more similar to suicidal ideation than it is to freedom, choice, and autonomy. The freedom, choice, and autonomy is a lie anyway, because it's the doctor or the nurse who are directly involved in the death. This is not about my freedom and somebody else is causing my death. It's all a lie. It's all lie, 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 lie. And guess what? How it works, as you know, with lies, the more you say a lie, the more people believe it's true because they've heard it over and over again.
All right. So, Alex, if people want to follow your work, follow your blog, where do they go?
Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, easy to Google. EPCC.ca is the website. EPCC.ca. Sorry about the .ca. It's Canada. Don't hold it against me. The blog, though, is the most important place because it is the world's leading source of information on these issues, whether you're pro-death or anti or pro-life. I've been maintaining these articles and writing articles since 2007. It is now the largest source of information in the world on these topics. So it's very good to read it. If you want to know what's happening in your state, you can go to the blog, hit the side bar and hit your state, and you'll know what's happened, whether it's legal, it's not legal, where they've debated it in the past, etc. And the arguments they're making. So once again, to conclude this, West Virginia, you're to vote yes on Amendment 1. And the other big thing is when the assisted suicide people are trying to legalize death in your state, they will always follow the same playbook. They talk about horrific deaths, and then the second thing they do, they say this is only for the few cases. Only for the few. But once they legalize it, of course, they never meant for it to be for the few cases. On top of it, it doesn't start up for the few cases anyway. But once they legalize it, they always expand the law because then they'll say, oh, those restrictions we put in, we realize now that they're actually blocking people who need a good death. Because then, of course, assisted suicide is the how would you say the best outcome is what they're selling rather than for those very few cases, which is what they originally sold.
Well, Alex, thanks for enlightening us on this topic. And here at Priest for Life, we will be sounding the alarm for West Virginians to vote yes and protect their lives. So thanks for joining me.
Yeah, ring the bell. Yes on Amendment 1.
Thank you. God bless. Well, brothers and sisters, I hope you're learning a lot today. You know, even if euthanasia is not currently in your state, it might be coming there, like Alex warned you. And please do not sign DNR orders or any of that stuff. In fact, on our Priest for Life website, you can go to priestforlife.org/will-to-live. It's a simple document. We have them there for all 50 states, what's legal in your state. And it's very simple. You're just putting someone who you trust, who you know knows your wishes, in charge in case you can't speak for yourself. I have one. I put someone in charge, you know, that knows my Catholic faith, that knows my wishes, because I keep telling them, don't you dare not plug me in and resuscitate me. Don't you kick out my plug. But anyway, I appointed someone. That's the best advice. Appoint someone who understands your faith, who understands your wishes in case you can't speak for yourself. Do not sign anything else, because in hospitals nowadays, they come out and say, do you have a living will? Don't sign it. It's all this stuff that's putting them in charge of your life. You want to stay in charge. Again, priestforlife.org/will-to-live. This is Janet Morano, Executive Director of Priest for Life. Thanks, and God bless.